So, welcome to chapter 5. In this chapter, we're going to look at police on the streets. We want to talk about the organization, responsibilities, and challenges facing law enforcement. Now, if you previously tuned in and you've been following along in this Introduction to Criminal Justice course, you will see that last chapter we started looking at the first of our three primary components of the criminal justice system. Last chapter, and in the previous video lecture, I focused on the history of policing. And I wanted you to understand that with policing, it came a long way. For example, as I previously stated, early policing resulted in a widespread corruption, such as you would have individuals called shire reeves, or you'd have parish constables, colonial sheriffs, thief takers. You'd have law enforcement that would only do the job paid to them by the wealthy, and even then they didn't do a great job. But then we had an individual by the name of Sir Robert Peel, who became the father of modern policing, and his Peelian principles are found even today when it comes to law enforcement. For our very own country here in the United States of America, August Vollmer in 1905 came up with a set of standards and principles and innovations within law enforcement that is felt even today. Hence, August Vollmer is the father of American policing. But as we did the history last chapter, it is important for us to come back and look at police in modern times. So what I want to tell you, class, is that this lecture will actually be broken into two parts. It's so much information, and I love lecturing on law enforcement because yours truly has some experience there. There's so much information, so much to talk about that I can't squeeze it in one lecture. So I'm going to break it into two parts. But with that being said, let's jump right into this chapter, shall we? We have to pause for a moment and look at contemporary modern policing, right? Because even though we looked at policing 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, it is important for us to look at policing in contemporary modern times. So we know the mission of most police agencies, rather, is to enhance our quality of life by means of enforcing laws, preventing crimes, and arresting suspects while upholding core values. Law enforcement's primary job, in fact, if you're taking notes or you just want to expand your knowledge, law enforcement officers are the gatekeepers to the criminal justice system. They're the ones you're going to be in contact with if you have an emergency. They're the ones they're the ones responsible for enforcing laws. They're the ones responsible for trying to prevent crimes. They're the ones who will arrest suspects. And so with that being said, if law enforcement agencies are there to enhance our quality of life, in fact, what is the old saying? To protect and serve. With that being said, if they are there to protect and serve, please understand that organizational core values are going to focus on certain police ideals: having respect for law and the community, being dedicated to service and professionalism, and having a responsibility for public safety. All of those are key tenets with respect to contemporary modern policing. So let's talk about police organization, shall we? Now, before I jump into this organization, I am a prop guy. And so what I decided to do was, let me go look through some old stuff that's been tucked away in a closet for the last, 7-8 years, give or take. And so what did I find? Well, I used to be in law enforcement. This is my one of my custom polos. We had custom polos. We had work polos, but we can also get custom polos. And this was from my time at the sheriff's office, one of the local sheriff's offices in Florida, of course. And I found this. I was like, I hadn't seen this in about 7 or 8 years. Of course, my hat, which has been through a lot better days, as you can see. But there's my hat as well. And as you see, the initials JRB. JRB stands for Juvenile Relations Bureau, and that was the bureau I was in. So I'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we talk about specialized units in just a little bit, and I'll reference this again. But I'm excited to talk to you all about police organization in law enforcement because I came out of law enforcement and I have a wide array of experience in law enforcement, the ins and outs of how law enforcement agencies work, chain of command, which I'm going to get to in a second, and just the overall structure of what it takes to be in law enforcement. Having said that, understand that state and local law enforcement agencies have a number of services. They provide these services to large cities, small towns, counties, other jurisdictions. You have college campuses. You all are college students. The university that you attend will have its own university police. Hospitals sometimes have law enforcement agencies. For example, if you work for the VA or you attend the VA has its own law enforcement agency that is responsible for the safety of the VA. But federal law enforcement agencies are prevalent as well, and there's two major influential agencies. The first is the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security includes CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, or Customs and Border Protection, some would say, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is ICE. ICE also includes DHS, the Department of Human Services, rather. Or not DHS, I'm sorry, HSI, Human Services Investigation, and then the U.S. Secret Service. The Secret Service is responsible for protecting the president and the vice president. Then we also, and there's a question right there, who receives the protections from the Secret Service? Of course, the president and the vice president of the United States. So DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, has federal law enforcement agencies that are under their umbrella, CBP, ICE, and the Secret Service. We also have the Department of Justice, or what's called the DOJ. The DOJ features law enforcement agencies. The top of the line is the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You also have the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, and the U.S. Marshal Service. So the reason why I wanted to show you, even though this is an introductory class, I wanted to show you the different law enforcement agencies that exist. It's not just your local police department and your sheriff's office, and that's it. You might, if you have a college campus in your town, no matter where you are in the country or the world, they have a law enforcement agency. Understand that you will have a sheriff's department and a police department. You might have specialized law enforcement agencies at hospitals or other, other events, for example. And then, of course, you have your federal law enforcement agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, as well as under the Department of Justice. Now, when looking at law enforcement, it is important to understand that there's what's called a chain of command. Now, I love understanding and talking about chain of command, and it's extremely important that if anyone aspires to go into law enforcement, you understand that you have a chain of command that you have to follow. What this means is that you do not get the luxury of saying, well, I'm at the bottom and I want to go talk to somebody at the top. It's not as easy as doing that. Chain of command can be very tricky to maneuver. And I can tell you in my career, I've had a couple of times where I've circumvented the chain of command and I got, a little bit of a chewing because I was early and I was still kind of young and I didn't recognize and realize that it's not just as easy as I can just go straight to the top and talk to the top. I have to follow the chain, so to speak. And so strong leadership by your chief or your other commanders is very important and essential in establishing respect and high-level organizational functioning. Now, your chief or your sheriff, and I have the definitions there, they are responsible for negotiating and intervening in difficult situations with politicians, citizens, and rank and file, but they also manage the day-to-day operations of the law enforcement agency. Essentially, think about how they are responsible for making executive decisions, hiring people, managing million-dollar budgets. If there's an incident where the law enforcement agency is looking bad, then generally speaking, they'll be the ones to kind of come in and clean things up. Now, as you see on the highlight, the chief of police and the individual at the top that you see, that's or not the individual at the top, the individual at the bottom. And I'm going to show you information about badges in just a second. Well, it's on the cover screen. But the person at the bottom is a chief of police. And the chief of police is usually appointed by the mayor or city council. You might not think that the mayor is a powerful individual of a city, but the mayor is very powerful because the mayor can choose to hire or fire the police chief. Now, generally speaking, a mayor is not going to fire a police chief without cause, but the mayor has that power, or the city council has that power. On the other hand, the sheriff is an elected official, and the sheriff is elected by the citizens of their respective community. The man that you see at the top is the sheriff. And generally speaking, you understand that he's the sheriff because of the star. So police chiefs, their badge is more of an oval shape. Again, I'm not going back to the first slide, but if you want to rewind this video back and go back to the first slide, you can see like the oval shape. That's their badge. The sheriff always has the star. Okay. Sheriff is elected. They are elected by the citizens of their community. The chief is appointed by the mayor or council. So just remember the difference there. So I want you to see the chain of command, right? Again, chief or the sheriff, they're at the top. Chief of police, appointed by the mayor, appointed by a city council, runs the police agency. Sheriff is elected by the people, runs the sheriff's department. The big difference between the two, by the way, and I love talking about law enforcement. It's crazy that I only get to do it in 3 chapters. I can easily do it for an entire course. But understand, folks, that when looking at the police department, they handle the city jurisdiction only. So if you live in New York City, you have NYPD, New York Police Department, right? If you live in Atlanta, you have Atlanta Police. However, because I live in Georgia, I understand that in Atlanta, you have Fulton County Sheriff's Office, right? The Sheriff's Office covers the entire county, which will include pieces of Atlanta and then anything around Atlanta in that county. But Atlanta Police can only cover the city limits. So there's a difference there, too, in terms of the jurisdictional responsibility. But as you look at this chain of command, just going through it, of course, you have your chief and sheriff at the top, you have your deputy chief, your undersheriff, and then you go down the list: colonel, major, captain, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, officer, deputy. As you see at the bottom rung, the officer deputy, that was my rank back in the day. That bottom rung, I couldn't just go way to the top and talk to the sheriff. I had to follow a chain of command, and that's why I got in a little bit of trouble, because the major was like, well, what is Fields wanting to do talking to the sheriff? Whoa, he knows he needs to follow a chain of command. And then I had to do all this paperwork just to have a meeting with the sheriff. You can't just waltz in the sheriff's office or email the sheriff's secretary or executive assistant, rather, and ask to sit down. The executive assistant's like, sure, that's no problem. Sheriff's cool. But the chain of command is going to be very hot at you for not asking, what are you going to talk to the sheriff about? Once again, if you don't understand politics, you recognize that you can get yourself in some trouble because you didn't follow protocol. That's why I'm including the chain of command. So how do you become a police officer? What does it take to become a law enforcement officer, right? Do you even have what it takes to become a law enforcement officer? Well, the steps in becoming a law enforcement officer are pretty consistent within all agencies, but there's some variation. You generally have to have a high school diploma, a GED. Some agencies will require a college degree. For example, if you're going to be a law enforcement officer on a college campus, you have any major university in this country. Name whatever university you want to name. Generally speaking, the law enforcement officers, the police officers at that university must have a degree. Now, no, you do not have to have a degree. Let me preface. You do not have to have a degree from the university that you're trying to be a police officer at, okay? You can have a degree from their rival, a degree from a university from a different state or a community college or whatever. But you have to have that in some jurisdictions. You got to go through a criminal background check. They will count your juvenile record against you. We will briefly, not too much, but briefly talk about the juvenile justice system just a little bit. But you have to go through that background check. You have to have your social media. I know that you all, especially younger people, you're on TikTok and Instagram and all that fun stuff. But if you have Instagram or TikTok videos of yourself doing drugs, partying like it's 1999, whatever, you might be in a little bit of a trouble if you want to become a police officer. And I remember when I was going through the process with this agency, with the sheriff's office, with this agency, I was put through the ringer when it came to the polygraph. Remember, August Vollmer created the polygraph or the lie detector test. Well, he didn't do a lie detector test for the purposes of trying to catch criminals. He did the lie detector test also because it would help agencies hire better officers. And so with that being said, you have to be transparent about your social media. If you're on different social media platforms and you've done some stuff that you shouldn't do, you may want to either consider an alternative, or you want to be right out the gate. Hey, y'all gonna see some stuff in there back in my college days where I was wild. I want to explain. And of course, you have to complete a physical fitness test. I remember the standards up here, and the standards are different everywhere. But for example, up here with some of the agencies I was going out for, and that's another story on why I didn't get it. But the standards were different. When I was looking at police, PD, you had to go through a grueling physical fitness test. You had to run a quarter of a mile in, I think it was like 40 seconds for men. Women could do it in 55 seconds. You had to do a minimum of, I want to say 30 to 35 push-ups. You had to do at least 30 to 35 sit-ups. You had to run and hop over a fence and crawl under a barrier. And you're doing all this in one day. And if you miss one thing, you're out. So if you're fast but not fast enough, you're out. When I was looking at sheriff's office up here, and again, the standards in Florida were very different. But when I was looking at sheriff's office up here, I didn't have to do all those things. I did have to do the push-ups. I did have to do the sit-ups. I didn't have to hop over the fence. I just had to run up some stairs and run down some stairs. Because in Georgia, the sheriff's offices, they're not really out on the road. They're not. If you want to be on the road going after bad guys, you're going to be chasing people. Therefore, they put you through a more grueling test. So I can share that with students who are thinking about law enforcement and be like, hey, if you want to go PD, this is what you're going to have to do. If you want to go sheriff's office, this is what you're going to have to do. But either way, you have to complete that physical fitness test. And if you can't pass one piece of it, you're out. Once again, you have your oral exam. I talked about the polygraph examination in the previous slide, but you do have to take that lie detector test. Listen, you will be drug tested. So if you like to use recreational drugs, and remember, when it comes to substances, I shared with you all in some earlier chapters, marijuana is legal in 24 out of our 50 states, where almost half of the country has marijuana legal for recreational usage. The sheriff doesn't care. The chief doesn't care that it's legal in insert whatever state you're in, Colorado, California, Ohio, whatever. The sheriff doesn't care. If you use drugs and you fail that drug screen, they're not going to hire you, period. They want people who are going to be healthy, and they want people who are not going to engage in substances, even if it's legal recreationally, But the process can take some time. So if you decide, hey, I want to be a law enforcement officer, I want to protect and serve my community, guess what? It takes time. It's not as, okay, you're hired, sir, you're hired, ma'am, and you're starting tomorrow. No. It's a process. So if you are desperately in need of a job, you're going to have to find some other means of employment until you go through every step. And it is a grueling process. Now, I put right here, because again, I'm sharing that I'm in Atlanta. As you can see, law enforcement agencies have critically low staffing numbers. And I believe I talk about this at the end of the lecture. But I'm sharing that you can find any recruiting event in your neighborhood or community, city, town, wherever you live, no matter where you're at, even during the summer. If you decided law enforcement was something you wanted to go into, you could absolutely attend a hiring event. And I want to take it a step further. As you see right here, and this is up in, I believe it's in Michigan, right? As you can see, they're even showing you what's the incentive. We're telling you what the salary is. We're going to start you at $46,995 a year. You can make plenty much more with overtime. Imagine if you did just 2 overtime shifts every other week. That salary probably goes from 46 to maybe 65. Plus, there's letting you know you get a $5,000 sign-on bonus. You get opportunities for special assignments. Now, going back to the special assignments, for example, so I was with the Juvenile Relations Bureau, right? Part of that bureau, for me, I was in a program called Teen Court. So I was dealing with juvenile offenders, but from a diversionary perspective. But other people in the Juvenile Relations Bureau were, what you see there, school resource officers. And so they were the ones who were keeping the school safe. So there's a lot of specialized opportunities for people as well. And then, of course, you see that you get paid holidays off, including your birthday, private gym, life insurance, and all those things. So they're trying to make it as enticing as possible, even though there's a risk associated with becoming a police officer or a law enforcement officer. Recruiting events like this are designed to entice people to come out and try to get a job within the agency. So let's talk about the police role. And this is something that I was very much satisfactory with. Because police officers are the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system, understand that law enforcement officers have something called discretion. Discretion is very important because this is something that only usually police officers have. Now, yes, lawyers have a level of discretion. They can choose what case they're going to take and what case they're not going to take. They can choose what case they're going to prosecute and what case they're not going to prosecute. But generally speaking, if they have a case in front of them that is, very easy for prosecution, they're going to prosecute the case. They're not going to have a choice. With discretion, this allows police officers and law enforcement officers to make an arrest or not make an arrest, to do something or not do something, but they have discretion. Now, they may have to explain to a superior why didn't they arrest that person, why didn't they do anything related to this person who may have committed a criminal act, but that's discretion, and that's what that means. So if you ever hear that term as it relates to police, or you're like, why didn't that police officer do anything? He was practicing his own discretion or her own discretion. Now, we know police officers are responsible for preventing crime and apprehending suspects. And so we have 2 types of policing that is important to understand. Reactive policing is just, that's where the police will react to what happened. For example, crime is committed, something happens, they call 911, they react and respond to the scene of the crime. That's reactive policing. What's important is the second part, and that's called proactive policing, and that's what involves crime prevention. Because if we can get to a place, class, where as a society, we want to try to prevent things before they happen. We don't want to react. We see people over here and they go ahead and let's say somebody attacks someone violently and we call the police. But if we see this person over here and we're like, that person looks like they're up to no good. I don't know if they're going to do something, but let me just intervene. We can be proactive and maybe we can prevent people from becoming victims. And so this leads us to the backbone of policing. You see, patrol is the backbone of policing. I say patrol is arguably the most important aspect and the most important unit within a police agency. See, I was in a specialized unit. I was in the Juvenile Relations Bureau. Again, as you see by my old hat that's been through the ringer. But what's important is patrol, because that's where the vast majority of your police officers will be in any agency. Now, let me tell you this much. Remember, in certain jurisdictions, like where I came from in Florida, we had patrol deputies, we had patrol police officers. But in jurisdictions here in Georgia that I'm familiar with, and law enforcement officials that I have befriended and have formulated a relationship with, in the sheriff's office, they don't have patrol deputies at all. They just don't. They might have specialized deputies in other units, but certainly not on patrol. Only police is doing patrol. Only the police officers are doing patrol. Now, let me tell you this much before I go on. If you're a law enforcement officer and you're in, let's say, vice, or you're in narcotics, or you're in juvenile, whatever, and you're driving around and you see something, you're going to stop, right? Especially if you're in your squad car or you're in an unmarked car, you're going to stop. That's just your mindset. With that being said, generally speaking, because patrol is the backbone of policing, that's where you have the greatest number of officers in that unit. And they have a wide variety of assignments. Maintain a police presence. Sometimes they're just driving around. They're not even having to respond. Other times they're going to respond to calls. They're going to have to identify and apprehend suspects. They're going to have to issue traffic tickets. They're going to sometimes have to stop and direct traffic if a street light goes out. If it's raining and the lights and power is out, they're going to have to get out there. They can't be like, oh, it's raining, I don't want to get wet. So patrol has some key and vital duties, as you can see. Now, as I pointed out, there are plenty of specialized units that exist in the law enforcement agencies. You have SWAT, you have crowd management teams, you have bomb units, or bomb squads, you have the K9 units, you have the gang intel task force, you have your motor unit, you have a lot of different units. But like I said, going back to me, I was in the Juvenile Relations Bureau. So with juvenile relations, our job was focusing on juvenile offenders. We had a number of specialized events and community events we did to engage young people and have them see us in a different light. So it was nothing for me once a month as an overtime detail or twice a month as an overtime detail to do this event called Books and Burgers, where my sergeant would be out grilling, manning the grill. Me and my partner and some of our other deputies in the unit would go ahead and be, reading to young kids and having them see us in a different light. It was nothing for them to do that. It was nothing for us to go out into some of the worst neighborhoods that had the worst relations with law enforcement, and they may be primarily dominated by minority groups, and us serve ice cream and just talk to people. And so that's what juvenile relations was all about, trying to reach people and trying to really reach kids and have them see law enforcement in a different light. And I was very proud of the work we did for those 5 years of me serving in law enforcement. Investigation is another key police role. When you have investigation, you usually have like detectives. Think about detectives who are working homicides. They are working cold cases. They are trying to find people who are missing. They certainly have to undergo extensive testing. They have to have strong interview tactics. You have to be able to talk to people. And they have to be high character individuals, because you as a detective, you generally have a very difficult task in trying to crack cases that regular law enforcement officers can't crack. And you have to try to solve cases. You can't just be sitting as a detective and be like, yeah, I got a nice great tie and I got a nice trench coat, and I come and I sit and prop my feet up on the desk and I'm trying to figure out stuff. No, you got to get to work. You have to produce results. And so with being a detective or being involved in investigation, you have to work hard to try to solve crimes. But again, being as a detective, it is important to know that, you're going to have long hours, long shifts. You have to approach situations with great caution. You have to remain alert and attentive. You have to make initial observations. And it's unfortunate. And there are a lot of videos you can look at out there on social media sites where you can see detectives or undercover officers engaging in significant misconduct. I knew of a deputy, a very, very popular undercover detective, who stole $20,000 from our agency, got fired, lost his career, everything down the drain for $20,000. And this was a man who had about a near 22 year law enforcement career. He probably had no more than 7, 8 years max before he would have been retired, having a permanent pension, and he would have been living fine, because under that plan, he probably would have been retired making $70, $80, $90,000 a year, because he served under an old plan. But he lost all of it for $20,000, and tragically he lost his life in a motorcycle crash. So it's just sad when sometimes you have people who are dedicated detectives or dedicated law enforcement officers who have engaged in misconduct, and it hurts their career, it damages the reputation of the agency, and it makes the community say we can't trust them, even though they're sworn to protect and serve. So who are the police? Who are the police? Well, I do want you to take a moment and just look at the insignia, so that way the next time you are potentially looking at a police officer, talking to a police officer, you can have a better understanding of what some of this stuff means, what some of this insignia means. So when you look here, again, when you see the deputy, if we're talking about a sheriff's office, that's where they have that badge, the star. Some sheriff's offices will have a 6-point star, others will have the 5-point star. When you if you're a police officer, you'll have like the oval badge, you'll have that oval badge. But you look at this insignia, and so the next time you see someone with the two piece chevron, you go, oh, that's a corporal. Or you see the chevron, the 3-piece chevron, you say, oh, that's a sergeant. 1 bar is a lieutenant, 2 bars is a captain, the leaf is a major. Like this will help you. This will help you in understanding, hey, I recognize what your rank is. You're a major. And they might be surprised, like, wow, I mean, you knew that just from my insignia? Yes, sir, I knew it. Yes, ma'am, I knew it. So just be aware that when I gave you the chain of command, within that chain of command, this is some of the common insignia that you'll see. And at least for this is for a sheriff's office. Again, the major, captain, lieutenant, sergeant, corporal, etc. That's all going to be the same with a police agency. With the only difference is the initial badge. Instead of it being a star badge, it'll be a cylinder badge. And oh, by the way, generally speaking, when you're the rank of, in some agencies, when you're a sergeant and below, so sergeant, corporal, deputy, or sergeant, corporal, officer, etc., your badge is silver. When you're a lieutenant and up, your badge is gold. So when you're a lieutenant, captain, major, chief, deputy, sheriff, whatever, you get the gold badge. But when you are just a sergeant and below, you get the silver badge. Again, it just makes it be like, I'm working hard to get that gold badge. So yeah. Is it okay to impersonate a police officer? The answer should be a resounding no. Absolutely not. Because in some states, according to Section 13A 10-11, impersonating a police officer or a peace officer, a person commits the crime of impersonating a police officer or peace officer if they falsely pretend to be a peace officer and does any act in that capacity. In fact, in some states, impersonating a police officer or peace officer is a Class C felony. And so with that being said, this leads me to my next piece of insignia from back in the day. So this is a sheriff's office badge. Now, I'm no longer in law enforcement. This was for me as a keepsake. I've worked in law enforcement for 5 years in one agency, 5 years in another agency, and then about 3, almost 4 years in another. But I'll talk about those other ones in a later chapter. With that being said, even though I did 5 years of service and I have this badge, even though I have this custom polo and I can even pull out this hat that's seen better days, if I'm walking around Atlanta and I'm driving around and I have this around my neck and I get pulled over, or better yet, I see misdeeds in Atlanta and I pull somebody over in my car, which has no lights, but I pull them over like, hey, you, pull over, sheriff's office, pull over. And they're like, excuse me, sir, what's going on? And I'm like, hey, you know what you were doing? I am impersonating a peace officer. I am impersonating a police officer. And you know what? I'm going to get in a lot of trouble because I'm not one. I don't do that anymore. I'm not that. And even if you're a police officer from Florida and you're on vacation in, North Carolina, you can't roll around with your Florida badge and be like, hey, I'm a police officer, stop. You know what's going to happen when the real police officers come in? They're going to say, sir, ma'am, you have no jurisdiction here. And for the record, we probably are citing you. And then at that point, you have to let your chain of command know what happened. Because let me tell you something. When you're sworn in, and when I was sworn in by the sheriff said, if you do not uphold this oath, step aside, because I want people that are honorable and that are here to protect the citizens of our community. So you can't go around with whatever badge you have showing that you are a police officer and impersonating a police officer. It is a crime. It is a crime. And when people have this type of apparel and they have this type of insignia, they may legitimately be a law enforcement officer in that particular community or a town or agency. However, if they're not, please, please, please notify someone ASAP so they can get in trouble. And that way it can be known that they are impersonating law enforcement when they're not. It is a very serious thing. Now, if you dressed up as a police officer on Halloween, okay, you're fine. If you want to do some role playing and, play cops and robbers with your friends, knock yourself out. But don't walk around impersonating a law enforcement officer and then find yourself potentially facing a serious felony charge and going to jail because you're not one. It's serious stuff. And I have videos that I'm attaching elsewhere so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So one of the most important characteristics concerning law enforcement is that it's the one job in America where a law enforcement officer has the ability to take your property, take your freedom, and take your life. This is a powerful statement because taking somebody's property when they get arrested, yes, you're not keeping their property. It's something called constructive possession, but law enforcement agencies will have constructive possession. I can't tell you a number of times the people I dealt with, especially as a probation officer, and I'll talk about probation later on when we get to corrections, but they'd be like, hey, Officer Fields, they got my phone. And I'm like, you can go down, you can take these steps, but I can't go get your phone. I don't have a legal authority to get your phone. And people are frustrated when their property is taken. Of course, we know law enforcement can take your freedom, taking someone to jail, arresting somebody. I've locked plenty of people up. It's not fun. It's nothing cute. I'm not getting a kick out of locking someone up but for grace, that could be me. And going to jail and having been in jails plenty of times and in lockup facilities, it's not a fun place at all. And of course, they can take your life. Law enforcement has the ability to use deadly force. So some key aspects of the police subculture, think about how there's a level of secrecy. I know that because of my former career, I'm at liberty to talk about some things because I've seen some things. I've been around people. There is a level of masculinity. There aren't as many females that work in law enforcement. Females are sometimes still seen as less than and not the equivalent of their male counterparts. The code of silence, it is a big thing, folks. I'm telling you, if you know somebody that works in law enforcement, they're going to be like, well, people don't understand. And like I said, it's a brotherhood. I'll admit, my time in the JRB and the Juvenile Relations Bureau, it felt like a brotherhood. Cliques do form, even though we were one of the bigger bureaus outside of the Detective Bureau and, of course, Patrol. Cliques do form, but it still felt like a brotherhood. But that code of silence sometimes when you see misdoings and your fellow brethren doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. There's a great risk for all types of illnesses, heart problems, PTSD, even taking your own life is very real in law enforcement. And I didn't bring this down, but I still have this card. It's called Cop Talk. And I get it at a conference. And it's something that I've been saving for years, that if you're a law enforcement officer feeling like you're lonely and you need to take your life or want to take your life, you can call someone live right now at this very moment, and a former law enforcement officer or someone who worked in law enforcement is there to talk you through those issues. And I hate that I didn't bring it down, but I have it, and I may even bring it and show it in the next video. But understand that the police subculture is a tough subculture to follow because of the idea and notion that the public does not understand what law enforcement do. And let me be real, the vast majority of the public doesn't understand. It is a subculture that exists within our larger culture. So in terms of classification of misconduct, sometimes you get corruption, law enforcement officers getting kickbacks, abusing their authority, maybe doing shakedowns, opportunistic thefts. Like I've seen that happen in the law enforcement agency I work for. People who had access to seize funds would take money, didn't realize they look up and the camera's right there as they're going in at this time, coming out, and the money is of course gone. Think about misconduct. Is it okay to accept gratuities like free meals and drinks? Hey, you go into a law enforcement, or you go into an establishment, you're in full uniform, or you have your insignia, you go get a free Coke, you get a free coffee. Some people will say, oh, it's just a free coffee. It's not a big deal. Are they doing that for firefighters? Or is that also being done for EMS? Some people argue that, well, police, they get free gifts, and why don't others get it? Or no, they should have to pay too. Again, sometimes misconduct does exist. And of course, criminal activity. When police officers engage in criminal activity, it undermines community trust and breaks that sworn oath to protect the law. So a question is it okay to bribe the police? What are some offenses where the police are most likely to be bribed? Think about during speeding and traffic infractions, or if the person is a convicted felon. I can tell you stories, if I have more time, about individuals involved in speeding and traffic infractions who, let's just say, they've tried to do some crazy things to bribe the police. And I will let you leave that up to the imagination. So in looking at, again, who are the police and talking about gender, once again, police culture emphasizes hypermasculinity. Female officers represent only about 14% of all sworn officers. There's not a lot of female officers that are gaining rank. As you see right here, her badge is gold. I don't see any insignia on her shoulders. So she may just be a standard officer, no other particular rank. Maybe that law enforcement agency, everyone gets a gold badge, but the ones I've been a part of, you didn't get a gold badge unless you were at the rank of lieutenant or higher, or if you were in police, if you were the rank of sergeant or higher. But understand that when looking at law enforcement officers, for females, you don't see a lot of females in the profession. It is growing. In certain places, and even in some college towns, you are seeing more females undertaking this career. But right now, it's still a career focused on extreme hypermasculinity, and males dominate the career. Part of why some of the differences exist, though, is because, one, there's the belief that a male officer is more likely to use force and they're more likely to be a little bit more aggressive, but female officers are going to use their communication skills. In fact, it's shown that female officers have the capacity to de-escalate situations better than males. Now, not every criminal is going to go ahead and comply with the female's officer's commands, while not every criminal is going to comply with a male officer's commands. But the male officer is like, I told you before to get down on the ground, and you didn't do it, and I'm putting hands on you. The female officer might be like, hey, I told you, sir, get on the ground. Sir, you need to get on the ground. Come on, I'm giving you a chance. And eventually she may have to go physical, or may have to use some tools that we'll get to in part 2. But generally speaking, when it comes to female officers, they're using de-escalation tactics, and it's better to use your words, use that verbal judo to de-escalate situations, because it could get very ugly if you're going hands-on and potentially having to get into a fight. And so with race and ethnicity, we know that there's a significant underrepresentation for minority officers. If you are in a place, for example, in certain areas of Atlanta, certain areas of Florida, where you have a heavier Hispanic population, certain areas of Atlanta, you have a lot more minorities. So we're seeing significant gains when it comes to minority representation, but there's still a great underrepresentation because we know that minorities have significant stressors, right? We know that they have this social distance from the white male workforce. I've seen it in my career. While there is a sense of camaraderie, sometimes a clique can form and there's a quote unquote good old boy system. It doesn't always exist, but it can exist. And then, of course, I have to be honest and real that when you're a minority who works in law enforcement, other minorities that don't understand the field feel that they should get a pass or they should be allowed a little bit more grace because, come on, man, we both brothers. Come on, man, you my brother. What's wrong with you? Or, oh, you sold out. You sold out. And I have had those conversations. And I have had those slurs yelled at me. I'm a sellout because I work in law enforcement. I am bad because I am enforcing the law. I've had it. And it's unfair and it is ridiculous, but yet it is still a point of contention that does exist when it comes to minorities in law enforcement. And so last thing I want to show you is that as you see when looking at the data from 2020, and 2020 is some of the most recent data, but when looking at the data in 2020, you see more law enforcement officers are white. Almost 72% of law enforcement officers in this entire country are white. And as a matter of fact, this data was taken in 2024. So we're still gonna have some time. Data, it takes time for data to catch up. So we won't get 2021 data until sometime this year. We won't get 2022 data until sometime next year. So I would assume that these numbers should be a little bit better. Obviously, we had the pandemic and we had other stressors, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, what happened in Kenosha with Jacob Blake. I mean, we had a lot of stuff happen during 2020. It was a very interesting time in law enforcement. That's one for a law enforcement class that I hope to teach one day or just do a lecture on here for. But as you can see, the white population dominates law enforcement. Nearly 72% of all law enforcement officers are white. We have a long way to go for our Black and Hispanic and even our Asian law enforcement officers in blue. So I want to thank you for listening. Again, I'm very passionate about talking about law enforcement because I worked in law enforcement and it was some of the best years of my life making a difference while working in the Juvenile Relations Bureau in the community. But we're going to stop right here. Please sure to follow, like, subscribe, check out the next video that's coming for part 2 when we look at police in the community. But thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.